Good morning, and welcome to Magic in Mind. I'm your host, Maggie Rose Cunningham. And I've got a question for you as you come in. For those of you who are coming into the live, joining me here live, you're joining the recording. It's have you ever been seduced? Have you ever been seduced or wooed by deity? I remember being seduced by Loki, or rather, I should say, actually, that in this particular moment in my relationship with Loki, I was an oracle for Loki, and I had the privilege of being the seductress, and seducing everyone around me as Loki, which I wasn't expecting. And when we hear about Loki, I said about my first relationship that I had with Loki was basically I saw Loki and it was like, no, danger. It's what comes up. It's like, it comes with like warning labels, all of him, doesn't he? These little signs saying, let's avoid this god because he's the trickster. And he was very associated with wildfire and this sort of harsh. There's like venom, there's poison, there's trickery, there's violence, there's all sorts of things associated with Loki that mean that we can get quite nervous when he comes calling. And I know that there are a number of you who are with me in the lives or who come on the lives for whom Loki is a very important patron deity. But I do wonder about the first steps. How did he woo you? Because as I said, when I first worked with Loki, one of the associations that kept coming up in the books that I read about him was wildfire. People will say he was associated with the North's rune. And here's the North's rune here. The rune of need, the rune of the need fire. And it's like this wildfire raging through the woodlands, destroying everything in its wake. And I thought, that's the type of deity that he is. But then I started to learn more about the runes, and I discovered that Loki is mentioned in the rune poem for Bacano, which is the rune of the divine feminine, of the birch tree, of this like new, innocent energy. And it talks about Loki as if he's hidden. There's this idea of camouflage or hiding. And so I started to look at him and see him more as a shapeshifter. And this brought in the trickster energy more. But it was nuanced. It wasn't as intimidating to me. And I started to become curious about Loki and to listen to him a little bit more and to research him a little bit more. Now, one of the things I quite find interesting is like across cultures, across pantheons, you can get these archetypal forms. And so when with the trickster, one of the things that comes up, which I had no understanding of whether there was any association with Loki whatsoever, is the spider. For those of you who might know, like the spider god Anansi, for example. And I knew Anansi. I knew the tales of Anansi from when I was a child. And so for me, that was the trickster. But I saw I had no idea that there was an association between Loki and spider until I discovered the. I want to say it's the old Icelandic, forgive me if I'm wrong, and it's the Faroese name for a daddy longlegs, which is loka center, I want to say. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. I should have looked up the word before we did this, which is comes from the name of Loki. And what it turns out is that there are actually two deities. So there's Loki, and then there's another deity whose name means wildfire, and they sometimes get conflated. And actually, we don't really have that much that ties Loki to the fire aspect of Northis. Remember this Northis rune here. But when I started to think, okay, so there is a connection between Loki and the spider and the trickster and the maker of knots. He's the maker of knots and entanglements. Then I started to feel that, and I realised that Northis, if you think about Northis, one of the ways we can also work with it is as the knot. It's the knot that's created by fate that gets tugged and it becomes the should do, the must do, the oath that we have made that then creates our fate, And so I went full circle with Loki from Northis and going, okay, so that's the warning beacon, don't work with Loki, through to recognizing that Loki is incredibly powerful as a god that helps us both to understand when we are walking a path that is necessary and how we can do that, how we can shape shift, how we can sometimes be a little bit tricksy. We're going to talk about later in terms of negotiating with gods. to allow us to walk our path and to do so in a way that sometimes is, out of the box thinking a little bit, and other times when we need to work with him to disentangle, to untangle those knots and to find our freedom, which Loki also does. And Loki is, for the gods, the Northern Tradition gods, he is a problem solver. Right? More than anything else. He's also a problem maker, let's be honest, but he's also a problem solver. And I wanted to give you this example, like my personal example of how a deity can show up to sort of open this exploration that we're going to do around working with deities and working with the runes they love. So I can see that we've got a few people here now, so hello everybody who is here with me live. So I've asked at the beginning, I asked about whether you've ever been wooed by a god. I'm going to open that out a little bit more to say, if you already work with Northern Tradition deities, or whether you're still to start, were you or are you a little bit nervous about working with a deity from the Northern Tradition? So it might be something in the past, and you, like me, you've taken a journey and you've recognised that although Loki does absolutely present challenging sides, as do most deities really, he also has a huge amount to offer. And that's one of the things that we're going to be unpacking through today. So if there is a deity that you're nervous about working with, or they're coming up for you, or you've got a rune that you've picked and you sort of think, that this might be associated with this deity, then let me know. And at the end, we'll look at any questions that you've got, or I'll bring them in if they seem sort of important at that point. Now, one of the reasons for me why being deity inspired, so some of us, you might be spirit led, you might not work with deity, you might work with other forms of spirit guidance, but we're looking at deity inspired today, that I think is important, is this sense in which when I acted as that oracle, I acted as an oracle for Loki, so I said, I'm ready to speak your words, to allow my body to speak what you want to say to this group of people. When we do that, my personal belief is that the deity still speaks through the web of being that is you. So they're not going to get you to do something that you've never done before in your life. You're not going to suddenly be able to sort of start dancing like Margot Fontaine. If you've never done any form of ballet practice before in your life, please feel free to disagree if you've gone, no, actually I've seen people perform absolutely totally different outside of their anything that they could possibly have known before. But my personal experience has been they use the vocabulary that's the vocabulary of my mouth. It's quite rare for a word that I don't know to come from. Occasionally it does, but mainly they're working within the parameters of you. And what that means is that when we stretch ourselves through these moments and we go, oh, I didn't know that level of seductive energy was available inside me. No idea that was there. And so this is one of the reasons why I believe that working with deity is so important for us, because it helps us to expand and to grow and to develop faith in ourselves and to follow paths that we might otherwise have shut down to ourselves. It's one of the most important ways in which we evolve, not just spiritually, but intellectually, intuitively, emotionally. All of these things, I believe that that's one of the very important roles of deity in our lives, is to support us in that evolution. And that's why I wanted to bring this topic today. And Suki, you're saying I was nervous about the first one that popped up, and it was Loki, because no boy. And then he made me smile, and then he popped up and I became alert. Yeah, and I think that that's important. We're going to be talking a little bit more towards the end around how we can work with our sage who has accumulated information about a deity, and then how we can work with our seer who receives the deity on their own terms in the moment, and how those two things work together and that interplay. So thank you, Suki. Thank you for breaking the seal on that. So please, as people are joining, I can see that people are still joining, do share your experiences or your aspirations for working with deity, and particularly within the Northern Tradition. I am going to go outside the parameters of the Northern Tradition a little bit today. Many of you will know I'm not exclusively a Northern Tradition practitioner. It's my calling to share that with you, but I do work across pantheons, as do many of the people that I work with. I consider myself to be a woven soul, multi-stranded. So I believe that one of the challenges for working with deity, and I don't think this is exclusive to the Northern pantheon, I can see it happening in the Roman and the Greek and maybe the Celtic as well, is that we can have stereotypes of those deities. So if you think about Freya, for example, I know I've had conversations with people before where they said, I'm so tired of those pictures of Freya where she's hardly wearing anything and she's sort of got a minuscule amount of armour on her as this sort of testimony to, she's a goddess of war. But what we're really interested in is the sexuality bit. And she's got this sort of blonde hair and, enormous chest and all of these things. And I'm not saying that if she wanted to, Freya could absolutely rock up looking like that. No, she could choose to do that. But it's limiting. It's limiting for a goddess who is a goddess of sorcery and working with the dead, and she is by no means playing when she's embodying that goddess of war energy. And yes, she's a seductress as well, but she can seduce us in so many different ways. But we get this sort of fixed idea. You might think about Thor as well, as often portrayed as being a little bit, I hate even to say, a little bit dim in some ways. And that sort of comes through, you can see it coming through in terms of the social structures that Odin and Tyr and Thor are patrons of. Thor was considered to be a patron, although he wielded his hammer and he was an incredibly powerful deity. He was seen as being a god of farmers in particular. And there's a stereotype that he's been brought into, which is a stereotype of people who farm. As if somehow, we don't need to eat. Incredibly important deity, and yet he's sort of been stereotyped this way, and we see him with this sort of red beard, and he's often quite sort of like lumbering somehow, and so we can get these ideas of what the deities are like, which then obscure their multifaceted natures. Now, I wanted to mention Odin as well, because maybe Odin does, to a certain extent, we can see him in a different guise. So we can see him as the All-Father, we see him sort of on the throne with his wolves beside him and hugging and munning his ravens, and he's like that powerful All-Father figure. And then he can also inhabit the the wayfarer, the wanderer, the magician type. But these are only two, and both of those are also quite stereotypical views of a sort of all-father deity who could also be Zeus, or could also be Jupiter, or could also potentially be the Christian god, or one of the like the big masculine gods. And of the wayfarer, wanderer, maybe a sort of Hermes type figure in some way, rather than what does he want to present himself to as me today. And we have to use the stories that are available to us to help us to encounter the deities when we're working from our sage, when we're working from that part of us that is the conscious mind processing intellect. Then we need that, and as intellectual beings we need a reason and a logic and some evidence, and that's absolutely fine that we have that. You'll remember I will mention right at the beginning my journey from recognizing that Loki was so much more than a destructive fiery force, and part of that was my journey into childhood stories that I've been told of Anansi that made me go and think again, and to be very, very clear, I do not conflate Anansi and Loki. I don't see them in any way as being the same, but there might be functions that Anansi opened up a new door to me that made me go, interesting, what else could Loki be? So we've got the stereotypes of the deities, and we also, I think, have stereotypes of like the Norse or the Viking. So we might think about things like the inspiration of the berserker rage, the divine rage that comes upon the berserker, and it's that sort of dangerous energy. And so we can get stuck in that, the Viking warrior type. Now, remember what I said about Thor, and that Thor was a god of agriculture. And if we look back, there will have been far more Vikings who were tilling and tending to the land than there would have been warriors. And I'm not saying that didn't mean that every person didn't train in some form of fighting skill in order to defend their land, but the majority of their time would have been taken looking after the land and being in relationship with the land. But we can have these, we can fall into stereotypes as well about what it means to be following in these paths, and what do I have to look like, what do I have to think like in order to have a relationship with these deities, which I would like to say, let's put that to one side now. Absolutely. If you're someone who's like, yes, I'm really, really pursuing that path, and I'm going to be covered in amazing tattoos and like glorious garb and be out there and finding my power through that, do it, absolutely. But if that's not who you are, please don't think, therefore, I can't have a relationship with Northern Tradition deities. We're going to be exploring a few of them today, but there are so many. And I'm really glad I can see in the chat that idea of the woven soul is resonating. It's something that I've been working on for many years now, and I must do some more on it because it's really important. Our woven multifaceted selves, as Erica and Chaos says, I think it's quite accurate to say I'm a multi-thread woven soul. Change that to the plural. And Esther says, the gods are just as complex as us humans. Yes, they are. Probably more so. They're just sort of been around for longer, so they're going to have that complexity. And I like to think that one of the reasons why we choose to be mortal is because we're like, okay, there's only so much of me that can fit into this one existence, this one lifetime, this one body, so I leave a little bit of myself, not behind necessarily, but it's just out there in the collective consciousness waiting for me to pick it up after this lifetime and go, oh, that was interesting. But we have these strands that weave through us. Okay, so we've looked at why it might be that it can be challenging for us to work within the Northern Tradition. So what I'm going to be looking at today is thinking about how can we create a broader relationship with our Northern Tradition deities through other points of access than the stereotypes that often come up for us in visual media, in particular on social media. At the moment, and many of them are very, very beautiful, but they can also narrow and confine. I'm going to be looking at a little bit at principles of negotiation, not massively so. This is something that's quite it's a complex area, but it's an important one. Do a lot more work with this for people who work with me on a Drazzle's Path of my shamanic program, but we're going to look at principles of negotiation around starting a relationship with a deity. And we're going to look at the partnership between the sage self, the seer self, and the mystic self, in terms of navigating that relationship with deity. Okay, so let's think about that broadening, and please do keep the comments in the chat. Please do, and any questions that you've got, I'll try and keep a little bit of an eye on that as we're going through, and also you can bring them at the end, and because I would like to address as many of your questions as I can today. So we've talked about story. So I want to go beyond story and to recognise that what I'm going to be discussing is something that is relevant beyond the Northern Tradition pantheon as well. I've mentioned the Roman, I've mentioned the Greek as well, probably the Egyptian too would come in as well. And there are other ways in which we can, other access points that we can use. One of them that I always find really fascinating is epithets. So these are describey words that go along with the deity's name. So Zeus Horkios, for example, it's like Zeus the oath taker. So you and lots and lots of pantheons have these. You'll find them in the Greek, you'll find them in the Roman, hundreds in the Greek. But you also have them in the Northern Tradition as well. Odin also has, I want to say about 100. He has a lot. I remember doing some devotional work with him and going through all of his epithets. And this is really helpful for us to broaden out our understanding. So for Odin, we can go in and we can say, okay, so there's these links with the dead, with thunder, with noise, with magic, with shape-shifting. There's so many different ways in which Odin operates within the world. If we start to go and we can look those up and find out more about the nature of a deity. Some of the Northern Tradition deities, we don't have as many of them available to us, which is a shame. But when we get onto the seer self, remember that you can also create epithets for your deities once you start to get to know them. We have archaeology as well, and one of the things that I think is challenging for the Northern Tradition is that a lot of the worship took place in wooden structures or outside. So we don't have beautiful temples with columns and all of those sorts of things. And we do have some, but we don't have as much, and that can be a challenge for us. But what we do have, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, is we have the runes, and that's the access point that I really want to go into today and to share with you and discuss with you. So the first group of runes that I'm going to be looking at are what I would call the explicitly associated runes, where if you say, I would like to work with a deity, which deity should I get? And you shuffle your pack and this particular rune comes out, then it's like, okay, it's probably going to be Odin, let's say, for example. Not always, though, and this is important. So I'm going to bring out 4 runes for us to play with today. So the first is Ansus. So Ansus actually means God or mouth. And people will often say it's Odin's rune. And you know, you can see why they might say that. You know, he's the All-Father. There are a lot of associations that are relevant with the Ansus rune that fall within Odin's sphere as well. Let me just find it for you so you can see it here. And it does bring us some really interesting, here we go, aspects of Odin and Ansus that help us, like a little Venn diagram that help us when we start to get to know our Ansus rune. It can offer almost like a gateway, and at the moment I'm talking about an intellectual gateway, the sage self, into the deity. So you notice that it's got these 2 downward pointing prongs, and I always think that this is it is going to be multifaceted, and Odin is multifaceted. So you can have this wild opening self. One of the words for Ansus is estuary. It's not just the mouth, the word of God. You might see this as being like Odin actually singing the runes into being, or birthing them into the world. It's like the mouth and the opening of the runes themselves could be one of the ways in which we work with the Ansus rune. And so it's got this wildness, and you can bring in Odin leading the wild hunt, you know, and that can come through. The inspiration, the ecstasy, all of those things can come through. The wind and the air and the waters and the rush all come through with Ansus. And then you also have the stability that the word brings. It is the creator of meaning, the creator of social structure. This is Odin as the All-Father here. And it's very much associated with the ash tree and the oak tree as well. So you can have a look and you can play with your tree associations, and you can say, well, what do those 2 things bring in here for me in terms of thinking about Odin? You've got the idea of the oak tree being the acorns that fed pigs, and it's like the plenty of the land. So let's not just think that it's always Thor, who is also associated with the oak, but who offers blessings to the land and to the fertility of the land. And we have got Odin as well doing his bit there. And so we can start to get to know a deity through a rune. But what I wanted to do is to make sure that we don't then just go, oh, you know, that's Odin's rune. Because we also have the god Bragi, who is the god of poetry and eloquence. And he will bring a totally different way of interacting with the Ansus rune. And think about we talk about the runes being carved on the tongue. So if you wanted to do a poetry, if you were like, you know, I want to channel some amazing, beautiful poetry, you might actually trace the Ansus rune on your tongue, which honours both Bragi and Ansus, as a way of drawing their 2 energies together. So that's our Ansus rune. What else did I want to say about? Oh, yeah, so the other thing I wanted to say with the Ansus rune is that obviously the word, also God or mouth, Ansus, it means like God or mouth. So we could think about this as being the deity rune, but there is another rune that vies to say, no, I'm the deity rune. No, so well, all of them really do, but you know, we're looking at the explicit ones right now, which is the Teiwaz rune. So the Teiwaz rune here is the rune of victory. It's often said to be the rune of the guiding star, and it is explicitly known as Tyr's rune. So Tyr is another god in the pantheon, and he was said to also be a king. Potentially, sometimes people see this as being like a war between the Aesir, Odin's deities, and an older pantheon at one point with Tyr. I'm going to say, well, I don't think that's quite right at this point, but Tyr was a king, then he became a warrior, and then he becomes a priest. So he, again, multifaceted, and his association with the Teiwaz rune enriches both him and the Teiwaz rune, because we often think about it and go, oh, you know, Tyr, he's a warrior god, he brings victory, I'm going to put the Teiwaz rune on my sword, I'm going to win. You know, that's what we can think. Or I'm going to go to the court, I'm going to get justice, I'm going to win. You know, which is, it's absolutely fine to work with the Teiwaz rune in that way. But there's so much more with Tyr to look at in terms, if you look at the shape of the Teiwaz rune, it can be an arrow, that moment of faith, if you think about him as the priest self. It can be this balance that we have here. Notice it's a very balanced rune. It's symmetrical, I want to say. And this is interesting if you think about Tyr, who loses his sword arm. He loses his sword arm, and this is why he stops maybe being so much of a warrior, and he becomes a priest deity. And what he really represents to me is the maintenance of integrity, of like spiritual integrity, the wholeness of self, regardless of what happens to your status. You know, so I was a king and then I became a warrior. Do I care? No. You know, this is a new evolution of who I am and what I'm going to become. I was a warrior and then I lost my sword arm and now I can't do that. So do I? Well, maybe care is too strong a word, but he is always able to move into his next evolution and to find the truth of himself in the moment. And the Teiwaz rune is enriched by that. It brings in this idea of spiritual truth, that which is our spiritual truth, which guides us and moves us forward. Now, Tyr and Teiwaz really relate back to an older word that takes us all the way back to pre-Roman and even pre-Greek, to the same root of the word for Zeus or Deus or Teiwaz, meaning God. You know? So we've got os or ansus, meaning God or mouth or opening, and we've got God or the divine over on this side. And what we might see here is more this sense of, again, almost like we were talking about being woven souls ourselves, weren't we? So imagine that that deity itself is weaving itself all of the time, and we have this one concept of Deus over in a large breadth of the land, and then maybe in another part of the land we have os, ansus, coming together, and then they are blended together and woven together through language, through the runes, and they become woven in and part of each other. And I don't necessarily see conflict. I don't see it as being, here's one king god, here's another king god, and they battle. There is no suggestion that Odin ever battled Tyr. You know, he does battle other people, but there's no suggestion there. It is an evolution. It's like the gods themselves are evolving. And both Odin and Tyr bring that in. You know, Odin, we already know that his death is foretold. Tyr evolves many times. And so we have that. And this is also inherent in one of the other runes that I wanted to cover, which has an explicit connection with deity, which is the Inguz rune. So the Inguz rune, the rune poem related to the Inguz rune, speaks specifically of Ing, the god, who, well, it doesn't say God, but it says like Ing, he went to the east and then he came back again. Like, what's that? What's going on with that? And here we go. Here's our Inguz rune. So it's sometimes a little diamond and sometimes it looks like a little helix, like a DNA helix. And it brings in a deity who is known as Ing or Ingvi-Freyr. So some of you will have heard of the deity Frey, so very much associated with him as well, sort of merging. We don't know whether it was one deity that became two, or there was two deities that became one, became two again. We don't know one way or the other. But there is a divine ancestry that comes here. There is another emanation of the divine that comes through the Inguz rune, of the god who sacrifices, of the god who travels and journeys. We can see this as being almost like the sun when it rises in the east, and the deity who travels towards that place of rebirth. Like the rebirthing of the sun is a place of rebirth. And he goes, Ing is often associated, Inguz, or Ingwaz it's sometimes referred to as well, because it's reconstructed, so we don't know whether it was Inguz or Ingwaz, you can use either, is often seen as being like the seed that goes down into the earth and is then cracked open and becomes a new plant. So it sacrifices itself in its entirety in order to be reborn as a plant. So this is a deeply earth-based emanation of the divine. And what I find really interesting with this is that we're never going to know. We're never going to know whether the runes emerged as utterances or iterations of a force that humans could sense out there in the world and felt as being divine before we separated, like nature and like conscious deity. You know, did we? We don't know. We don't know one way or the other. Or whether there were already deities and then those deities were brought in to the runes. We don't know. I find it quite exciting that we don't know. So I wanted to mention one more. I've already mentioned this, so just a reiteration. So the Bacano rune has a rune poem that specifically mentions Loki. And with Loki, we have an interesting piece because it talks about him sort of being in camouflage or disguise. There's a story of Loki shape-shifting to become a mare. And during that time, he is impregnated. And so he becomes a mother. And so Bacano is quite interesting in that he is reborn. But he's reborn in a female gendered body for a period of time so that he is able to give birth. And he gives birth to Sleipnir, the steed that Odin then rides between the worlds. And so there's a very deep mysteries associated with Bacano and this idea of shape-shifting and this idea of the divine feminine. And I do find it sort of fascinating that not so many of the runes are explicitly tied to specific goddess energies. There are suggestions that the Bacano rune may have been related to a goddess called Berkta, or Perkta, who is a mother goddess, but we know very little about them, and we don't know whether that's because the runes emerged at a point when the divine masculine was coming more into ascendance, or that the divine feminine was simply considered to just be there. It's just there. We don't need to name in the same way because we all know already. We don't know one way or the other. So those are the explicit runes. Now I wanted to mention that each of the 8s in the Elder Futhark, so there's 24 runes and they're divided into 3 families of 8 runes each. 8 means family, confusing, also there are 8 runes in the 8. And each of those 8s has a deity name. Now I'm not going to go into that today because we're looking at the runes specifically. But if you're interested, do reach out, let me know, and we can do another piece on that. But my understanding is I haven't found anything that's particularly ancient about those associations, but I can see why they came into being. So then we've got our implicit associations, and almost every rune, not all runes, but almost every rune, we can draw an implicit association between a rune and a deity. Some of them may be a little bit more far-fetched than others, and if you're interested in this whole topic, then please do join me on Awaken to the Runes, which is doors are open and we're going to be starting 23rd of June, I want to say, so there's still plenty of time to join. We do a whole module around deity and associations with deity, and I go through like every rune and the deities that my understanding is that they have been associated with the very, very many books that I've read over the past, as well as my own work and things that I've done with other people. Suki saying, who was the other deity associated with them? Says, Esther's already answered that. So that was Bragi, god of poetry. The other one, by the way, and this is why we'll start to get into this, would be Saga. So Saga is an implicitly connected deity associated with Ansus. She is the goddess of, well, she's actually a seeress. Her name means seer, but she's considered to be, Odin goes in, he consults with her every day, and she's considered to be the keeper of story. If you think about saga, meaning literally like the sagas, she is a keeper of story, but she bridges the poetry and the historical. She does both. And so she's very much associated with Ansus as well. Ansus in the Wheel of the Year sits within Saga's hall. So, there are associations that way. So you can see how a lot of the runes can be implicitly linked to other deities as well. Very famously, they're probably one of the strongest associations is between Feyu and the goddess Freyr. And I mentioned Freyr at the very beginning. And it's this sort of life force, vital energy, sort of energy of gold. There's a story about a giantess called Gulveg who is said to come and sort of embody the spirit of gold, and she really confuses Odin. I'm not going to tell the story now, but it's a brilliant story. And she's often thought to be Freyr in disguise. Freyr is a keeper of the mysteries of the earth magics, sort of rising up with the Feyu energy. I almost always associated Feyu not just with Freyr but with Orthumla as well, who's like the primal cow. She's the great, like the first mother who gives indiscriminately to all beings. It's this bountiful, plentiful energy of Feyu, the first rune in the Elder Futhark, the beginning of all things, sort of nurturing that we can. And some people also associate this Feyu rune with Frey as well, as distinct from Ingvi-Freyr, who comes later, but with Frey as well. Sometimes it's called Frey's 8 rather than Freya's 8, which is the name given to the first 8 of the Elder Futhark. Let's just have a little look at one. Now, Thurisaz is an interesting one. So this means thorn, giant. It's this sort of wild primal energy, and because of that, Thor is often associated with the Thurisaz rune as well. His hammer Mjolnir, which sort of turns the wild energy of Thurisaz and harnesses it. And then he goes out and smites giants. It almost has conflict within it, but it's this harnessing of the Thurisaz energy that comes through Thor. So he's often associated with Thurisaz. We have Suelo. That's a nice one to work with. So Suelo is the rune of the sun. Here we go. And so because it's the rune of the sun, chariot of the sun, it's a sort of turning wheel of the sun moving round and round. It's often associated with Suna and Sol. So Sol is the goddess who pulls the chariot of the sun, and Suna is her daughter. And in some tellings, they share the responsibility, and in others, when Sol is swallowed, or when the sun is swallowed by Great Wolf, then Suna will take over. For me, as you know, when I work with Suna's Star Wheel, I talk about Suna's chariot. And one of the reasons for that is that it just it makes it easier because there are other pantheons where there is also a deity called Sol. And so it's just to make sure that we all know that we're working within the Northern tradition. And it's also because we say Sunday, and therefore I tend to use Suna as well. But they're mother and daughter. So they're associated very much with the Suelo rune. So we can have some that are very strong associations. And then we can have others like this. We've got the Manaz rune here. We've got the Manaz rune. It's often associated with Odin as Odin enthroned. So it's actually the divine human. It can be associated with Odin, it can be associated with Manus, who is another ancestral deity, said to be like a deity who came down and sired mankind. Or Heimdall was also said to be a sire of the social order of mankind. So a lot of deities get associated with this because they in some way are ancestors or they represent sovereignty. So you can look for that. So you can see Frigga in that as well, representing sovereignty. So that's where we get a lot of the other associations that come with the runes. Gibo, very frequently associated with Geifion, and you can hear the root in the names as well. So Gibo becomes Gifu, which means gift, and then we have Geifion, which is like the harvest. You can see like the gift of the harvest. She's a goddess of the harvest. So we can see this idea of exchange coming through. So these aren't what's the word? Some are very substantive. Very, very substantive. You know, we can really clearly see why this deity would be associated with this rune, and others are more, we can decide whether we agree or not. One of the associations that I really like is an association of Frigga with Largus. See any reason why that would be the case. Largus, the rune of water. But I want to say it's Freya Aslan, but I could be wrong, so please don't quote me on this one. Talks about the Largus rune of water, as being like a spindle, like a drop spindle, and there's the thread coming out, and there's the spindle spinning, and that and Frigga is said to spin weird. She's said to spin weird, which is weird is often seen like the waters of weird. So they go up, they become clouds, and then she spins the clouds, and then she creates a thread, and then she takes not the thread, ignore me, then the threads, and then she gives them to the Nornir, and the Nornir weave them into tapestry of life. That's one of the things that is said. It's more tenuous, but I like it. And that's where we come on to the third category. I'm just going to check what people have said in the chat box. Like it says, evolution of the gods and goddesses is such a powerful concept. I'm really glad that you like that too. It's honouring of their living nature and ongoing relevance, perhaps needed now more than ever. I absolutely agree. I also believe that that is one of the reasons why the Northern Pantheon may have sort of gone down into the earth for such a long period of time. They were like, well, this like Christianity, the Age of Enlightenment, all of those things need to rise. We will go down into the earth and replenish and bring our energy forth so that when the world is ready for us, we will be ready. When the world is ready for a much more earth-based, more masculine, feminine, balanced way of working, when it's in need of individual connection to spirit once more, then we'll be there. I like to think that that's what they were doing. You've got a question here. Tia, I feel his evolution is entering a lover chapter, so he tells me. Very welcome manifestation of the sacred masculine indeed. And why not? Surely the Tewas rune has phallic representation too. Yes, indeed. Indeed it does. And it's interesting that you should talk about the lover as well, because I know one of the stories that, again, there's very little true evidence for this, but I still like it, is that before Tyr was a king, he was an hermaphrodite deity, similar to Ymir in that sense, one of the really ancient giant deities. And that at some point he gets separated, and the goddess who he was said to become Tia and Ziza. And Ziza we know very little about, but I did a blog article about Ziza. I'll see if I can post it, because I really love her energy. And I did a whole, in the hearth space, I did a channeling around this. But I can feel that on Oste, he's not going to go back. He's not going to try and reclaim that self, but that idea of the masculine wooing the feminine, and also perhaps of, for me, there is a rebirthing of the masculine that needs to take place at the moment. We've been seeing a real rebirthing of the feminine, and Tia would be such a beautiful deity to see that, to really embody the divine masculine reuniting with the divine feminine after all that time. I love that. And I'm really glad, Erica, that resonated with you, that idea of them going underground and then coming back. It's just what I see. It's my own personal belief, but I'm glad that it's resonated with you. Okay. So the final thing that I wanted to bring in for how we can work with the runes and deity is that we can work with them because, excuse me, a deity comes forward and says, I'm going to be your guide for working with this rune. This is one of the ways in which Suna Starwell came about for me, because I was working with runic astrology, and I was realising that as I went through the planets, I would get Thor, Thor's chariot in Largus, and it would be like, oh, so Thor is now going to be my guide to working with Largus, and he would give me a whole new, again, similar actually to what you were talking about, Megan, this idea of the relationship between Thor as the guardian of Midgard, and the water has been such an important aspect of Midgard, and this protective energy that Thor can have with the Largus rune. Now these can come through and can give very nuanced, powerful associations that we might not have thought of otherwise, between a god who is said to be the protector of the earth, but obviously that includes water within it as well. What does that mean about our sacred relationship with water, how we work with water? And equally, a rune might come. You might say, I want to work with this deity, which rune wants to guide me to work with this deity? And you might pick a particular rune and go, oh, that's going to be interesting to work with. So Hagalaz, for example, has just come up. I pulled Hagalaz there. So again, if you think about that with Thor, that brings to me his relationship with the Jotun, the fact that he is a giant, and he's often asked to work in combat against the giants. I'm also seeing, for some reason, the moment where he's wounded by a rock that hits him and it gets embedded in his head. That feels very Hagalaz-y, doesn't it? And he goes to a healer. The story goes that he was trying to entertain the healer because she was so nervous about taking the rock out of his head. She was like, oh, it's Thor, what am I going to do? And he made her laugh at the key moment. She was obviously like a magical healer as well as a practical healer. Key moment was missed, and so he ends up with this rock that just stays in his head, which is one of the explanations which is given for the big red storm that's on Jupiter. So Thor is Jupiter is Thor's chariot, which wasn't there when all of these deities were sort of about. I think it's about 400 years old, I want to say, the red storm in the eye of Jupiter. Tell me if I'm wrong. But I like it as a story. It's a nice little explanation piece. So you can see how you can draw a rune and it will evoke a particular story about a deity for you to then go and explore. But equally you can do it the other way around, and you can say, okay, which deity wants to teach me about this rune and its power? So we can have incredibly powerful relationships with our runes and with the deities that expand. Remember I was talking about the reason that I think we need to work with these deities is to support us in our evolution, and some of the reasons for that have been given in the chat box here today. That we need that relationship with our land, with spirit, with the stars. We need to feel as if we're in co-creative relationships, as if we are part of and with an immanent divine. It's not up there and we're down here. It's with us through this period of time in our history. Eric's saying, yes, I work with Tyr intensely as my guide to help me rise as a wounded healer. Such a powerful wounded healer, and he's a great example of a divine masculine. He absolutely is coming and saying, I had Tyr came forward and I was nervous about working with him. I don't know him, and I don't like the story with the Fenris wolf where he binds the Fenris wolf. He sacrifices his arm to do it. But still, the Fenris wolf is sort of like this wild creature, and I like wolves, and I don't like it. How do we go about doing that? So what I wanted to say is this is my experience, my personal experience of working within the Northern tradition, is that the Northern pantheon don't command us. They don't say, you must come and worship me. No, I've never had that experience. Even where I may have already entered into a relationship of fealty with a deity. So I might have undertaken a period of devotional work with them. I might be in the process of offering devotion to a deity. It might be that they're offering me their patronage. So Odin is the patron for my Awaken program and for my Idresel's Path program, for example. Frigga is the patron for my Birth and Soul Journey program. Freyr is the patron for Amplify Your Magic. Even then, or if you've entered into an apprenticeship with them, you're working with them for a period of time, even then there is still room for negotiation. So even if you've said, I'm in a process of exchange, I'm receiving from this deity, I'm receiving wisdom, guidance, all of those things, and I want to offer back. Normally, if they were to say, I want this, you could go back and you could say, well, can I do this instead? No, that doesn't feel right to me. It sort of goes against what I want to do. And that can sometimes happen, particularly in the conscious mind, because obviously in the Northern tradition, and I should say that I in all cultures, our culture is very different to the ancient cultures of old, when there was very little that people had to offer. And so it would have been very common to offer blood, to offer life force to deity, for example. Now, I'm not someone who wants to do that, even if it's like an animal. I know some people will do that, sacrifice animals to deities, and that is, it's an ancient way in which it was done. It's not something that I'm ever going to be comfortable with. And so I'll say, well, how else can I do this? Or for some people it might be an offering of money. I don't have money. Now, in this instance, given what I was just saying about the blood, there is an example that I would give that would be different. I had somebody who didn't have the cash flow to be able to participate in the Feiyu flow of energy, and to say, I'm going to give money to charity, I'm going to be part of the Feiyu flow of energy, because Freyr has said that might be the case. And so they went and donated blood instead. They said, this is a way in which I can give. So you can have other ways in which you can give in that sense. What else did I want to say? So they tend to ask us to offer things that we are good at, or that we enjoy, or that might be within what I would call our stretch zone. So our learning zone. They're asking us to evolve a little bit. So they're sort of saying, right, you can go out and do something a little bit like Loki, sort of saying, let's explore your seductress right now. Let's sort of see what's going on with that, and move outside of your comfort zone. So they can do those at times, but it tend to be that they ask us to move into the terror zone. So if they say to you, yes, come and move into your terror zone, do something that's totally outside of what you want to do, you can go back and say, actually, I'm not going to be able to offer that, but I can offer this instead. Now, so if you're looking at working with a deity, one of the things that you can do is, it's always worthwhile making the first offer. So you're saying, hello, I'd like to work with you, and this is what I can offer. They like that. They like doing that. And if they say to you, actually, I'd really like, your wedding ring or something. I have had that request come before. You can say, you can either say, no, but this is what you could have instead. Or you could say, can I have time to consider that? And then come back with something that you think would be commensurate. I think they quite like that. I think they quite like us to be able to stand in our power and say, that's not going to work for me, how about for you? They enjoy a bit of bartering, let's say. Okay, so that's the principles of exchange. Now, apologies if we went a little bit wobbly there. I can see that there was a moment where my internet was a little bit weird, so I hope that didn't disrupt the connection for you. So I can't see it at my end, so apologies if it did. So we've got those principles of exchange for you to think about in terms of a deity coming forward and saying, I'd like to do this with you, so that you can offer something else. The other piece that I wanted to bring in this piece for you to think about is recognizing that when we work with deity, we can draw on three particular areas. We have the relationships of the past. That's the realm of the sage. The relationships that people who came before us had, and they have recorded what it is that worked for them, and that's been passed down. And that's a really good foundation stone. It makes sure that we're grounded, and it makes sure that we're connecting with, Loki and not Anansi, whatever it is, that we're actually connecting with the correct deity in that moment. But then we have the realm of the seer. And the realm of the seer is the realm of the present. And what I'd like you to think about here is recognizing that it's not just about, I want to go and work with a deity and I'm going to pull a rune and then the rune's going to tell me what to do. This is also about what your body, what your seer self knows inside. So the seer works on like reading the runes, doing all of those sorts of things, but the seer also knows instinctively inside what's right or what's wrong for you. In this present moment, is it correct for me to work with Tia right now, and how can I do so safely and wisely and powerfully for me in the moment? So a lot of the work that I do with people is around really feeling into their bodies and trusting their bodies. The realm of the seer is very much inside. It's that sort of interface between you, the being who's chosen to be born into this moment, this time, this place right now, and what's out there in the world. And I want to distinguish that from the mystic, who is the, what the possibilities might be. So when we do rune readings that are around, I'd like to work with deity, what might be there and what might be available to me, often we're tapping into the realm of the mystic, into possibilities. No, this could be possible, that could be possible, this could be possible. So you do your rune reading, Freya's showed up, or actually, Angela Balder wants to work with me, lots of different things you could look at, or they've come, and that's the mystic going, here is one possible future that's being presented to me right now. But then you go back into the seer to say, do I choose it? Do I choose this moment? And that's important. And I don't believe that is being disrespectful towards a deity who said, I'd like to work with you, or to a rune who said, this might be possible. It's just recognizing that part of the partnership that we're talking about, part of this of deity rising up to speak to us is, and at this point is recognizing that we have spent the last 1,000 years going it alone, without that connection. We're looking at creating like our evidence bases and seeing what we can do and standing sort of alone in our power. And I don't believe that this resurgence of Northern tradition deities and other pantheons and of a more earth-based spirituality is a letting go of all that we have found out about ourselves and all that we have achieved. It's the partnering. And that's the important piece for me, is recognizing that the divine is everywhere. The divine is in me, it's in you, it's in the deities that we are working with. And we might see them, however you view them, you might view them as being godlike in a very low. We're humans, they're godlike, there's no correlation between us. You might see them as being like more evolved beings. However you want to see that, I do believe that we're at a point where it's saying that there is a partnership. There is a partnership, and that includes us being able to say yes and to say no, and to be in partnership with our deities and with our runes. So, again, apologies if we went a bit blippy. I think it looks as if it should be all fine now and working, but we've come to the end of our piece. So if you have any more questions, pop them into the chat box. You can put them in after the live, and I will endeavour to answer them as well. Just a little bit of a recap of what we have done today, just as a reminder for you. So we were looking at having a broader relationship with deity through working with the runes in particular. We looked at principles of negotiation, and we looked at working with your sage and your seer and your mystic, and navigating that partnership through working in particular with your seer. So, 2 support mechanisms available to you. If you want to cultivate that relationship with Northern tradition deity through the runes, then Awaken to the Runes is your next step. If you're thinking, actually, I don't know, enough about the sage self, or I need to access my seer more strongly, or that mystic self that is that connection with what's possible and what's the potential, then look on bagandrose.com under events and goodies, and you'll see when the next retreat for reclaiming the power of that part of your magical self becomes available. So thank you very much to those of you who have joined me live, and to those of you who have joined me and the recording. Let me know how this lands with you, what's important to you, whether it has improved, whether it's increased, let's say, increased your confidence in working with deities from the Northern tradition. And I would love to hear how that goes for you.